Hello, I'm Skull and welcome to a retrospection of Star Wars The Force Awakens. I imagine this might be a shock to those in my audience expecting another Daredevil video, but this is something I've been interested in for quite a long time. With Star Wars holding a very significant grasp within popular culture and film analysis, I figured it would be interesting to discuss where this new reinvigorated pop culture Star Wars mania really began. I know the OT is very revered and the prequels are passionately defended, but this new series of films holds a very unique place in that they are now produced by a completely different company, and much of the audience are just now capable of seeing these films as adults and teenagers rather than very young kids. I felt it would be interesting to tackle what is chronologically the sequel to the original trilogy, easily the highest praised area of the Star Wars franchise. My plan for analysis is to discuss this movie from a storytelling perspective. Though I am a fan of the series, this will be purely focused on the story's writing, as viewing anything from a fan perspective is detrimental to discussions of objective quality, as this makes it either so good it is beyond critique, or so bad that it should be omitted from discussion altogether. With the discussions going on about Star Wars itself at the moment, a lot of people have begun looking back over the whole saga to really pinpoint the aspects of quality within it. Instead of discussing The Last Jedi, where a lot of this arguing really began, it might be more engaging to look back on the first film of this new trilogy, the one that teed off Last Jedi to happen and the conversations about Star Wars thereafter to happen. How does it actually stand up as its own movie, part of this established franchise? So The Force Awakens was released in December 2015 to high appraisal, with many fans and critics considering it the jumpstart the franchise needed to get back on course after the prequels, as they were heavily criticised. Pop culture was gripped with Star Wars pandemonium, and it seemed the small but vocal community that was apprehensive about the new film was silenced. I myself attended the midnight showing and was voluntarily swept away by the tide of Star Wars insanity that now had a titanic grip on our culture. 4 years later, and after very different conversations have sprung up regarding Star Wars, I became interested in The Force Awakens specifically. Surely it was actually good, right? No way can pop culture be wrong, right? So I delved deep, and was rather surprised by the results. I'm going to discuss The Force Awakens as a film, what it does well, how it holds up as a movie on its own. I'm going to try and break down the film's plot, world building, and characters in order to show how strong the film can stand on its own 2 feet. That simply means I may very well say things that you don't like or disagree with heavily, so all I'll ask is that you retain an open mind and keep yourself receptive to hearing these things. Keep in mind I did say I attended the midnight premiere and was thoroughly enjoying the hype for this new movie, so if I say some things that sound harsh or unfair, just remember that it was only really after the newer releases that these questions even came up in my mind. Also, if you caught my last video about Daredevil, I highly recommend you watch it because I think it's really good, just saying. You'll know I'm not a fan of bringing in external media to support things that are not explained in depth, like comics, books, games, really anything other than the thing itself. I'll be retaining that handicap as I believe that anything of value must be good on its own, even if it has other media connected to it. Since this film's a sequel, however, I will allow the OT and its setups to discuss certain things about this new film. I will not be taking the prequels into account, as they don't really factor into this movie. You don't need to watch the prequels in order to understand this. All disclaimers out of the way, let's get into The Force Awakens. So in The Force Awakens, we're told that a new interstellar menace has risen in the form of the First Order, a new imposing totalitarian force that, quote, rose from the ashes of the Galactic Empire, referring to the antagonists of the original trilogy who met their doom at the end of Return of the Jedi. They are on the hunt for Luke Skywalker, hero of the galaxy and protagonist of the original trilogy, and will not rest until he, the last Jedi, has been destroyed. Attempting to inhibit this new threat is General Leia Organa and her brave resistance, who have the blessing of the Republic that was formed after the destruction of the Empire. This is just about all the backstory we get to this new galaxy, because it then goes into the immediate setup for the actions that follow the crawl. So I'm going to be rather blunt here, this is incredibly weak world building that leaves more questions than it answers. How were the First Order able to rise from the ashes of the Empire when they were significantly weakened by the end of the OT? Surely there must have been a new government, or some safeguards at least, put in place to prevent tyranny on a galactic scale? No? This First Order was allowed to just rise up and take the place of the Empire, even though they were undoubtedly evil? Considering how bad they actually were, you'd think some measures were taken to prevent this sort of uprising from taking place, but we're not told anything. There's also no information of this new galactic government's role. How do they work? What are they comprised of? Is Leia running it? The prequels at least address how the Empire was able to slowly build up and take over. There's barely anything here. This is made doubly worse by the fact that it says that the First Order are not the ruling government, they're just on the rise. What is this government doing to combat them? Anything? If the Resistance is their answer, why are they called the Resistance? That name implies a struggle against an oppressive force, but if the First Order aren't the government, then they're not oppressing anything. Surely the Resistance should be the Republic Army Corps or something. I'm not saying this can't be explained at all, I'm saying it's not. There's very little discussion had about the galaxy's government after the Empire fell, so there's not really a lot to latch onto and care about. I guess we're just expected to brush it off because that's what the OT did. But the original trilogy was the beginning of the story. Empire was running things, it was bad, it needed to fall, and it did. This is after that, so surely something should have happened? I guess not, meaning the Republic is incompetent or there's deliberately vague information. These two options are much better than the third, leaving out important world-building details because they couldn't be bothered to actually do any deep work and relying instead on fandoms and critics saying, just sit back and enjoy the Star Wars, don't think about it, because that would just be terrible. To be clear, I'm not calling these plot holes specifically, I'm just saying they're holes. Holes in the story that could be very easily explained, but they're not, leaving very little for us to actually latch onto and essentially rewriting the universe so the sacrifices and actions performed in the original trilogy are now worthless. Since this First Order was apparently able to rise very easily and become the new Empire, essentially. The similarities to A New Hope are plentiful, with the new World of Evil Starkiller base now capable of destroying multiple planets, and a desert planet by the name of Jakku. Jakku, I understand you want your protagonists to pretty much come from nothing, but Starkiller base just seems like a massive rip-off, honestly. I understand that's kind of the point, but it doesn't change the fact that it really does come across like a rip-off. So that's all I'll say on that. It would have been a lot cooler to actually do something bold, daring, and new. No, not like that. I mean keeping these kinds of references intact while also respecting the source material and pushing it in new directions that keep to that respect. So this ain't a good start for The Force Awakens, but that's not the end of it, I'm afraid. In The Force Awakens, we're introduced to Poe, the antagonist Kylo Ren, then Finn, then Rey. I'll focus on these new characters for just now before moving on to the original trilogy characters that show up. First up, Poe. He is said to be a daring pilot in the crawl, and from the following action sequence we're shown he's a good shot and willing to put himself on the line to secure a goal for the Resistance, as he tells BB-8 to leave with the map to Luke Skywalker while he holds the troopers off. While he's being tortured by Kylo, we're also shown him to be tough, as he looks beat up, but so far as we know hasn't given them any information. And we're then told that he is the best pilot in the Resistance by Kylo. So now we know that Poe is not only skilled and willing to self-sacrifice, but also important to the Resistance's operations. He was already probably my favourite character out of these new ones, and he remains genuinely a great character. He's also the most generally consistent one out of the new crew, which I will soon expand upon. We don't see him a whole lot, but what we do see is entertaining and endearing, probably due to the charisma of Oscar Isaac. Next introduced is Finn, a turncoat stormtrooper, disillusioned with the First Order's actions and looking to atone for his sins as part of that group. From his first scene, there appears to be an attempt to humanize the stormtroopers to some extent, judging by the shot of Finn attempting to help a fellow stormtrooper who has been shot and then panicking as he watches the surrounding destruction. Due to this, he then breaks Poe out of the chamber and they attempt to escape together. Now, I was very interested by this new angle for the troopers. They've never really been focused on to this capacity and in this angle, which could lead to some interesting moral complications and debates about how we can just watch hundreds of them be mowed down and not really care. It tries to say, hey, they're people too, you know? Or at least that's what I thought. When Poe and Finn steal a TIE fighter to escape, Finn fires upon troopers in the base, probably killing a good handful of them, and then he fires at the office overlooking the hangar, almost seeming deliberate in his execution. This honestly just seems really out of touch with what was just being set up. Finn's response to the First Order's actions of mowing down innocent people is guilt and shame and confusion, but then he himself is perfectly willing to blow up people he may potentially personally know? This is the first sign of inconsistency to come with the character, and the implications about him being repulsed by the First Order's wrongdoings isn't touched upon to any deep level. Besides shoutings of traitor and a short monologue to Rey, which is pretty much immediately forgotten about when the First Order attack Maz Kanata's building. I mean, it is fun to watch faceless stormtroopers get shot down, of course, and if they were to be humanized to any level, it would be weird and cold to watch them get mowed down in swathes. So why is this very significant scene that is essentially the beginning of Finn's emotional arc not developed or expanded upon in any meaningful way? If the argument is that Finn's fight with Kylo is him facing up to the First Order and realizing that he needs to fight it, as personified by Kylo, then I'd argue that already happened when he blew up a hell of a lot of stormtroopers and equipment in the hangar bay at the start. His arc's already finished. But we also get a few throwaway lines to tell us that he's not concluded his arc. On another note, it's not really made clear how experienced Finn is as a stormtrooper. How long has he been at it? If he's been at it for a while, then it might have been cool to see some previous instances where he doesn't comply with the First Order, but then we're told straight out that he hasn't previously done anything like this.
No prior signs of non-conformity.
This was his first offense.
And if it was his first mission straight out of the academy, so to speak, then why is he just now reacting like this when he's been programmed from birth? In which case he probably would have been killed or cast out for insubordination. We're shown that Phasma kind of acts in a supervisor role. to an extent, asking Finn to submit his blaster, presumably because they thought there was something wrong with it and that's why he wasn't firing. But if you can't tell what's happening to him from looking at him, then you're just a little bit silly, honestly. So yes, this is the start of the character inconsistencies I was just talking about, and this is definitely egregious, but it's not the end. Believe me, there's more to come. It's such a shame because John Boyega is a very talented actor and I can tell he's very energetic to be here. It's just his character that's wasted by both this film and then The Last Jedi. Anyway, moving on. Next up we have Rey, a scavenger living on the planet Jakku, who turns out to be force sensitive and follows Han and Finn into this big new adventure. Now Rey is considered a controversial character to discuss because of the associated label of Mary Sue attached to her. So I'm going to look at just what the character does in this film and then kind of form my own judgment on that. So Rey is shown to be entirely alone and self-sufficient, taking parts off of surrounding machinery like Star Destroyers and the like in order to sell them for food. Her introduction is done without any dialogue spoken by her. I actually especially like this because it really allows you to get a sense of who the character is through their actions and expressions alone, without a single clumsy word getting in the way. When she meets BB-8, we learn she can speak the language of the individual hassling the droid, and then she can understand BB-8 when it bleeps and bloops. This is fine, judging by our assumptions that she's been here for a while and the abundance of droids throughout the planet and universe, it's reasonable to assume she can speak and understand both languages. So that's cool, and also adds more longevity to her situation of living on Jakku. We're then shown that she's compassionate and interested in the new and unknown, considering she doesn't give BB up when this big dude offers to give her a lot of food in exchange for the droid. She's even willing to physically fight for him. After this, when she stops Finn and demands answers, she is shown to be rather dedicated to the droid, considering the fact that she immediately sprints after Finn and stops him by smacking him with her staff. Fair enough, this thing is very unique to your situation, so I understand why you'd want to keep and defend him. Her initial interactions with Finn are nice, but then the First Order immediately shows back up and they're forced to leave together. In the Millennium Falcon, no less. A bit convenient, but okay. Her self-sufficiency is even reinforced when Finn grabs her hand to start running.
What are you doing?
Come on!
Let go of me!
Come on, we gotta move!
I know how to run without you holding my hand!
And then they get into the Millennium Falcon. And then Rey is shown to pull off the most incredible piloting of the Falcon I think has ever been shown in the movies. I'm not kidding, Rey makes any of Han Solo's escapades in the original trilogy look like he was flying with multiple aneurysms. So now we can assume that she's a fierce pilot who has flown the Falcon on numerous occasions.
How did you do that?
I don't know.
No
I've
one
flown some
trained-
ships, but I've never left the planet.
Oh. Okay then. How was she able to perform that level of proficiency in flying just about immediately if she's never flown the ship before? This is the sort of action that requires some precedence to the character, a little bit of setup if you will, so we can understand how and why the character is doing these things. Keeping their backstory vague can be good to heighten interest in that character and the resolution in the story, but we all know how that turns out. So yes, the scene is cool and visually dazzling, but character-wise it requires a suspension of disbelief considering how little we know about Rey, not to mention what is explicitly stated in the movie. She even tells Finn himself to fight back, when we can assume he's had at least some training with gun turrets given his stormtrooper background.
What are you doing back there? Are you ever gonna fight back?
When they meet Han Solo and Chewbacca, we learn she can also understand Wookiee.
No, it's true. We're the only ones on board.
Didn't see any Wookiees on Jakku, so I don't really understand how she can speak the language. Finn even comments on it.
You can understand that thing?
And this is kind of where it starts to fall apart. She fixes an issue on the Falcon before Han even figures it out. She's a crack shot with a pistol upon her first time using it, considering how Han was using it to coach her. And she's force sensitive to an absurd degree, fighting off Kylo Ren's mind control technique, and using a Jedi mind trick, and pulling a lightsaber out of the snow when another Force user was trying to get it. Yeah, I'm starting to see a pattern here. The point is that Rey, while definitely still somewhat interesting, at least until the final fight, which I'll get to, is displaying abilities and powers that aren't supported by her meager backstory. She's waiting for her parents, who are not known to us until The Last Jedi, and she's good at just about everything she does in very little time. Now, Luke in A New Hope was hardly believable considering all that he did, but he was at least shown to be training with the Force, and was already shown to be somewhat adept at flying. Rey says she's flown some ships, but never the Falcon before, never used a gun, and also didn't believe the Force was real until that day. She's doing a lot for someone without any setup. The interest in her parents is also killed when Maz Kanata says to her that the people she's waiting for are never coming back. This eliminates practically any interest in her backstory, as we're now being told she's to let go of what was keeping her on Jakku. The Last Jedi capitalized on this, but The Force Awakens definitely at least implied that her family was not important. Any interest that could be held in this new trilogy is gone after the confrontation between Rey and Kylo. Now, plenty of people smarter than myself have broken this fight down a lot deeper, so all I'll add is that even upon the first viewing of the film, I knew there wasn't going to be any tension for the rest of the film, and the rest of the trilogy between these two. Rey defeats the main antagonist of the trilogy in her first fight against him. Admittedly, he was wounded and emotional, but Finn even gave a decent fight against him, and given his stormtrooper background, at a stretch, he's had at least some melee combat training. After Rey beat Kylo, even the first time watching, I knew the inevitable outcome of all the coming fights between them. Rey is going to win. Granted, you know your good guy is always going to win, but doing it in the first film and without any training or setup with a lightsaber or the Force eliminates any progression she could possibly make. And don't give me the argument that a sword style weapon like a lightsaber is similar to a staff, so that's why she's good with it. A staff and a sword are not the same thing. That's just completely indisputable. Nobody who uses a staff is automatically as good with a sword. Anyway, there's no emotional resonance because I know that she's won already, so there's no reason to believe she won't win again. All tension and investment in Rey's growth as a character is gone. I was honestly kind of confused why she felt she had to go to look for training. You already beat the bad guy in a one-on-one, why not just wait for your opportunity to actually kill him? So yes, I'm sorry Rey stans, you may not want to hear this, but Rey is a poorly written and underdeveloped wish fulfillment character who is somehow better than already established characters at their own game. So we can assume that they're trying to have a strong character from the start. Having a powerful character from the beginning removes really any tension and investment from the story because there's nowhere for that character to go. Yes, Luke did destroy the Death Star on his first run, but he also didn't do that all on his own. He was about to be toasted until Han showed up to ward Vader off. In his first actual fight with Vader, he loses terribly. This is compelling because we want to see how the good guy can overcome his struggles and win his conflicts through hard work, determination, and intelligence. Starting your character by inputting the Konami code removes this entirely and kills any longevity in your story. So if you want your story to last for a good while, go for the original trilogy route. Don't go with this new thing. And I'm a little bit out of breath now, just give me a second. Okay, moving on. Our first major new villain is Kylo Ren, an unstable and moody dark side Force user who is revealed to be the son of Han Solo and Leia Organa. We're shown he is powerful and adept in using the Force, being able to stop a blaster shot in mid-air and freeze people solid with the Force. So he's powerful. He kills the old guy at the start and tortures Poe with the Force, showing a ruthless character, willing to perform dark deeds to get what he wants. So he's ruthless and powerful. Two building blocks to create an imposing villain. And then we're shown he is conflicted about what he has to do in order to fully commit to the dark side. Kill his father. So this is new for a Darkseid Force user. He even wields a lightsaber with a crossguard on it, which is very visually cool and intimidating, even if it is unfeasible considering how the crossguard of a regular sword interacts with the wrist. Kylo is probably the most interesting of the new characters, considering how his conflict is portrayed. He's being pulled in two different directions, he even says so himself. So yes, Kylo Ren is a compelling antagonist, and if The Last Jedi actually portrayed him well instead of just immediately resorting to being the main antagonist running the First Order, I might have actually been interested to see where his character goes for the third one. The Force Awakens set that conflict up, and then The Last Jedi takes it on a weird roller coaster ride and then plonks him right back to where he was at the start of The Force Awakens. Thanks, Ryan. Now, with the new characters discussed, the main ones anyway, you know, the actual characters, not the product placement insert. Let's get to the returning characters. Luke shows up for like 13 seconds and has no dialogue, so I'm not even going to bother with him. So I'll just discuss Han Solo. Han Solo in this movie is pretty much the same character he was in the OT. Roguish and stubborn, on his own with Chewbacca. His relationship with Leia isn't really shown or expanded upon much. It's not like we would want to see him and Leia have a good back and forth, talk about old times, maybe even reminisce about the good times with Luke. It's all strangely similar to the OT, but again, it's not developed much. All we really know is that they broke up after their son Kylo turned bad. Don't get me wrong, Han Solo is pretty much just in this movie to die. He is a plot device for Kylo Ren's story, ultimately. A couple of scenes with Rey and Finn don't really mean anything in the overall story. I also don't understand how Rey gets so attached to him, they've only known each other for like an hour. It's a pretty bold move to bring back a very well known and beloved character, only to kill him to set up a totally new character that nobody is even as remotely invested in. It's not as bad as Luke's death in The Last Jedi, as it's actually done pretty well in the movie itself. And Harrison Ford himself wanted the character dead. But still, it's just sad. Han isn't shown to have grown very much in the past 30 years since Return of the Jedi, and all his interactions with Leia are either bittersweet or underwhelming considering the struggles they went through in the OT. Chewbacca is pretty much just the same as the original trilogy as well. It would have been cool to expand on him a little bit more, but honestly there's not a lot they can actually do with him on his own. I mean, he's absolutely useless and wasted in The Last Jedi, so I don't even consider him for this segment. Ultimately, all the performances are fine. John Boyega and Adam Driver especially are very good, but most of the characters come up short when considering all their beats in the script. Poe is charismatic and daring, but also consistent, so he's fine. Finn is likable enough, but inconsistent with regard to the humanization of stormtroopers, and his own backstory is riddled with holes. Rey is good at everything she does almost immediately after trying it for the first time, and there is a distinct lack of tension with regard to her arc and development, since she's already pretty much finished. And Han Solo is brought back pretty much just to die. I honestly can't see these new characters becoming even nearly as iconic as the original three. So yes, as it turns out, these new characters don't really stand up too well from a critical standpoint, which is very strange considering how many of them we actually see at fan conventions and considering other characters that exist in this franchise like Han Solo and Darth Vader, with the exception of Poe. Yes, The Last Jedi takes the characters in new directions, but make no mistake, The Force Awakens is absolutely weak in its characters as well. In terms of production, yes, the visuals and sets in the movie are stellar and very well done, even if some of them look overly similar to the original trilogy. The visuals are awesome. I especially like the grittier action sequences. Sure, there's still a good amount of lens flare, I personally don't have too much of a problem with them, but the action in the movie is impactful on an audio and visual level. Blasters hit hard, explosions sound devastating, and the lightsaber fight, while suffering from its character flaws, is visually splendid. Seeing the blue bounce off the red in the snow just looks glorious. All this, however, means very little when your plot, world building, and characters are incredibly messy. It ultimately means this movie is only worth seeing for the visuals, because if you think about the characters or the development of the world in any critical way, you're going to be left underwhelmed and probably a little bit sad. Like me. Yes, I liked this film when it was released, but all I started doing was asking very fundamental questions like, how was the First Order allowed to become a thing when the original trilogy happened not too long ago? And then realizing that there's very little in the movie to actually tell you this means my investment started to wither away. Then I got to the characters, and that's when I really started to squint heavily at this movie. To be fair, if The Last Jedi hadn't happened, I probably would have remained blissfully unaware of the fundamental objective problems this movie has. So I guess that's something it's good for? Overall, Star Wars The Force Awakens looks cool, sounds cool, and is part 7 of a beloved franchise, and if that's all you're looking for, go right ahead and have fun with it. Just don't expect it to stand strong under any objective criticism of its plot, characters, or backstory development, because you'll be sorely disappointed and you'll probably just be left hating yourself for the fact that you allowed yourself to like the movie despite its obvious problems. If there's this little effort being put into massive budget movies on this scale, then there are some people we should really be having strong words with. The Force Awakens is weak. It's more than weak, it's lazy. It's more than lazy, it's bad. I feel like I've done enough to prove that point. Now, all we do is wait for the rise of Skywalker, to see just how far down the whole franchise has fallen. Well, that was fun, wasn't it? Thank you very much for listening to my persistent rambling. I've wanted to talk about The Force Awakens for a while now, I just really had to put into words how weak I find the film. Or how weak the film is on its own, because really, my opinion didn't mean anything here. If I've made any mistakes regarding the film, then by all means drop them in the comments, I'd genuinely enjoy reading them. This was by far the most work I've ever actually done and the most I've ever written for a video, so if you could give this video a like, I'd appreciate it a lot. Maybe even subscribe if you're feeling generous. I have a few more videos like this one on my channel if you're new. I recommend my Daredevil one as it's probably still my favourite video I've ever made, or I have a few rants about Game of Thrones if that's more up your street. They are a bit harsher and swearier than this and the Daredevil video though. If you have any ideas for a film or a game or a TV show you'd like me to discuss, drop them in the comments as well. I love to have feedback. Regardless of what you choose to do, thank you so much again for watching, and I'll catch you later for whatever comes next. Cheers.